We're trying it again. So, hi all. So this is going to be part 3 of our baby making series, and we've been talking to Lisa Grant of Spring Mountains Acupuncture, Fertility and Wellness over in Las Vegas over the past couple weeks, and I just need to connect with her. So please bear with me as we go live. So there she is. Hi Lisa, we're adding you.
Hello.
Hello. So I was just introducing our talk today. It's going to be about IVF as part of our baby making series, and Lisa has been so gracious to share this information with all of us. And this is actually her baby. Like, she's an expert in treating IVF patients and has had a lot of successful results with this. So yeah, what is IVF? Let's talk
Okay,
about
so
that.
first I'd like to say we have another guest here. I have no guarantee that this one's actually, she's going to stay, but this is Maya. So she's my little 4-footed kiddo. So anyway, so if she's disruptive, apologies in advance, but she's a cat and she does her own thing. So what is IVF? IVF stands for in vitro fertilization, and it's the most involved of the assisted reproductive technologies. Sometimes you'll hear it, referred to as ART, and that just means assistive reproductive technologies, and it includes everything from being on just some medication to IVF, which is when the reproductive endocrinologist basically puts the woman on birth control and then controls her cycle, gives her stimulation medications so that her ovaries will produce as many follicles as that it can. And then the doctor goes in and retrieves the follicles or the eggs in the follicles. And then, it's also known as test tube babies from way, way back. And what happens is that the sperm and the eggs are combined in a petri dish. Often, they'll actually just inject the sperm into the egg, allow it to mature for 5 days, and then that whole process is called retrieval. And then you have a second half of the process, which doesn't always happen in the same month or even in the same timing. Often it'll happen later on. And what'll happen is at transfer, they'll take that embryo and then put it back into the woman's uterus, and hopefully the follicle or the embryo implants, and then the couple becomes pregnant. So that's sort of the process in a nutshell. It's a lot more involved than that, but that's what IVF is. Okay.
Yeah, it's incredible stuff, because as an undergrad, I actually got to experience or even like witness what it is like to create a test tube baby, like from taking like the actual syringe and inserting that into the
Oh, cool.
extracted egg. Like, it's incredible because you're just sitting there and you're just like, oh my goodness, you're seeing conception happen, and this doctor who's doing this process is like essentially playing God, and it
Well,
just
I
totally
prefer
blew
to
my
call it
mind.
playing Mother Nature,
Okay,
because
playing with nature. Um,
so yeah,
but yeah,
it's
like it just like blew my mind.
It's an incredibly technologically, it's a technological miracle, and I understand that those two things, that's sort of an oxymoron, but the
Yeah.
whole fact is that the fact that, you know, we've entered an era where, you know, couples who were infertile and dealing with infertility didn't have any kind of technological um, uh, options, you know, back in the
Hmm.
70s. And this the first time a test tube baby was created, I think it was in 1978, by Steptoe and Johnson over in England. And, you know, even in the beginning stages, it was still it was something that was not always guaranteed to work. As the technology has improved, and it has done an enormous amount in terms of helping us understand reproduction and what goes into reproduction, so that it actually in some ways helps us understand more about how things happen naturally, as we get a better understanding of, you know, what the hormones involved are, and how they all work together and what needs to happen. um, so it's an incredible technological miracle. And, you know, the rates of successful rates of implantation and pregnancy are going up all the time, because there's constantly research that's being done on this. That is not to say that it is cheap. Okay, IVF costs a lot of money, like a lot of money. I'm in the process of writing college tuition checks because my youngest is in college, and IVF can cost as much as, you know, a year's worth of tuition at a college. So it's not a step to be taken lightly. It's not, and it's not easy on the woman either, because the doctors are interfering with her hormones. They are boosting them, and a lot of women report significant and severe side effects from being on like 10 times the normal amount of estrogen that they would normally go on. And so it is not a benign procedure, but it is often um, the only procedure that will give a couple a chance at creating their dream family, because of some sort of issue. And we talked about some of those issues last week. It's, you know, endometriosis. It's like, if you have endometriosis to the point where it's blocked your tubes, or there's some other, you know, undiagnosed sexually transmitted diseases that created blocked tubes, often IVF is the only answer. Or if a woman has had a series of ectopic pregnancies and her tubes actually have had to be removed because of the damage that was created, again, IVF is the only option. With some women with PCOS, they're just, the quality of the follicles aren't where we want it to be. So IVF can help, because with something called PGS testing, um, which is pre-genetic screening, the doctors can actually screen out those embryos that wouldn't make it anyway. You know, that if they transferred them, the embryos really wouldn't have a chance because some sort of major fatal flaw. Or, you know, if the parents are a carrier for a fatal or terrible disease, PGS testing can help the parents avoid transplanting or transferring those embryos that really don't have a very good shot at being a healthy, viable pregnancy and child. So, and then the other one, and this is a good number of the patients in my practice, is AMA, advanced maternal age. And what happens in advanced maternal age is that the age of the eggs that the woman has are the same as the age that she is. And even if she's lived a relatively healthful lifestyle and doesn't have any particular complicating issues or factors, the issue, her eggs are still older, and older things often don't work as well as we would like them to. And the miscarriage rate when women are, especially once they get to 40 years old, increases dramatically, because the eggs just don't have the energy internal to them to be able to power through the whole process of implantation and pregnancy. So what IVF does is it offers couples who are older the opportunity to actually improve the odds that they're going to have a successful pregnancy. It's not a guarantee, okay? It's not. But the technology allows couples to maximize the opportunity that they're going to have a child. And where we come in is what we discussed last week when we talked about, acupuncture and Chinese herbs. Fertility acupuncture can actually improve the quality of the eggs and the sperm, if it's a male factor issue, to again increase the likelihood that there will be a successful fertilization, and that the embryo will actually be able to, you know, transfer in and implant and turn into a fetus. So, you know, there's a lot of, the technology is amazing and it has some downsides, and we can talk about some of the symptoms and stuff like that. But it's incredible that couples that up until now really didn't have any likelihood of being able to conceive actually can have that chance.
Yeah,
So.
it's incredible. And I know some people have gone through it and, you know, they're just, you know, they're just think it's such a blessing to have something like that happen for them and that it actually works. You know, because it's something they have dreamt about for so long. And, you know, now that we can do that as part of
Yeah.
our technology, and, you know, and even with acupuncture supporting that, like, it's incredible that now, like, you had talked about doing all of these medications, like just even increasing the amount of estrogen in the body, and the body having to go through that. Like, I know that acupuncture can definitely help the the mom carry the baby a lot easier throughout the entire process, just because the body's going through so many different things. And maybe you can touch on that a little bit more, like, you know, what's the process, you know, just detail a little bit more, like, you know, from injections to you know, just following this regimen in order to, you know, have the extraction and then, you know, putting the pieces together.
Yeah, and regimen is a really good idea, or good word. Okay, so what the way that the process works, and actually I think that's great, because if you can understand what the process is of IVF, then you can understand a lot better what it is that fertility acupuncture can bring to the table in terms of improving it. So the woman will always go through like significant amounts of blood testing. She'll get something called an HSG, which is a transvaginal ultrasound that allows the doctor to take a look into the uterus and also up the fallopian tubes, just to make sure that the fluid flow is what it's supposed to be. Then the doctor almost always orders something called an AMH level, and it's a blood test. And what it does is AMH stands for anti-Müllerian hormone, and it measures the level of the hormone that is produced by developing follicles. If you recall back to last week's talk, it takes 90 days to develop a healthy egg. And what the AMH is basically a measure of the number of eggs that are in the pipeline getting ready to actually be available for the final maturation stage, and then from the reproductive endocrinologist point of view, for retrieval. And what they want is a fairly decent number in AMH. So, you know, normal is considered between 1 and 1.5 to 4. Any more than 4, and it is highly likely the woman has PCOS, which is an issue because it means lots of follicles, but none of them will mature correctly. And if it's lower than that, then she's considered to have a low ovarian reserve. And what that means is just that there's not a whole lot of egg follicles in the pipeline. And that is a concern for a reproductive endocrinologist, because reproductive endocrinologists know that during the whole process of retrieval and fertilization, and then that 5-day maturation process, in general, the number of eggs lost is anywhere from 4 to 5 out of 6. So for every 6 eggs that are retrieved, the reproductive endocrinologists know that 4 or 5 of them are not going to make it all the way to the end of the process, which means that IVF is a numbers game, and more healthy numbers is better. Okay. The other reason that they're concerned about AMH is that for a Western reproductive endocrinologist, there is no way to increase the number of eggs that are in the pipeline. What you have is all you have. And looking at the statistics, generally ovarian reserve only goes in one direction, and that's down. So a lot of reproductive endocrinologists get nervous when they're seeing a woman who has an ovarian, an AMH that's less than 1, because what it means is that the number of follicles that she has available for the doctor to retrieve is low, and they, from their experience and from their medicine paradigm, there's no way to increase that number. So AMH levels basically tell the doctor what's going on and how much there's going to be available in terms of the numbers of eggs that they can retrieve. And from that, they can give a woman, a couple, kind of a rough estimate of how successful they think the procedure is going to be. Okay, so that's why AMH is a really big deal. And the thing is, and we'll get into this a little later, fertility acupuncture can actually, in some cases, change that AMH number and also improve the survival rate of the eggs going through the process, because what we do is we actually rehabilitate the strength of the healthiness of the egg. Okay, so back in the reproductive endocrinologist's office. So woman does a whole lot of blood work, and my patients come in and go, oh my gosh, I think I gave 7 to 8 tubes of blood yesterday. And it's like, well, there's a lot of things to measure. And then what happens is once the couple decides to go through IVF, the doctor will often, and not always, because there's variations on this, and some doctors are now moving towards what we call a more natural cycle IVF, where they try and sync with the woman's body anyway. But it just depends on what the woman, what the doctor thinks will be the best course of treatment for the couple. So the woman often will go on birth control, because what the doctor needs to do is completely control her reproductive cycle, so that the doc knows exactly when she should be taking what medications, and when the doctor needs to be doing their retrieval process. So the birth control basically lets the doctor know exactly where they are. All right. So she goes on birth control, and then when it's time to start doing the retrieval medications, she goes off the birth control, has a little period, and then she will often start injections. And what the injections are is basically synthetic versions of follicle stimulating hormones. So they're versions of the normal hormones that the woman's brain would usually be secreting. Okay, but again, the doc wants full control over the cycle. So the medications suppress the woman's pituitary gland so that it doesn't kind of interfere and throw off the timing. And then the doctor and the medications are actually standing in for the woman's own pituitary and secreting follicle stimulating hormone to tell the ovaries, hey, develop those follicles, develop those follicles. And what the medications and their injections will do is, between the FSH, and then the woman is often on estrogen shots too, or patches or suppositories, just again, depending on the doctor and the woman. What it's doing is basically hyperstimulating, and you'll hear it referred to as that. IVF is a hyperstimulation of the ovaries. So basically the ovaries, instead of just having a few little fruits on the tree, are going to explode with follicles. They look like they're super lumpy with all these follicles that are developing. And then after she goes through a certain number of days of stimulation, and the doctor is doing ultrasounds to kind of see what's going on with the follicles, once the follicles develop to a certain size, then she'll do what's called a trigger shot. And the trigger shot is basically the same thing as luteinizing hormone. Again, refer back to the first 2 talks that we did when we talked about the hormones and how this whole cycle works and what a normal cycle is. Basically, the doctor will give the woman a shot that mimics luteinizing hormone, and that gets all those follicles that have been developing the last little bit of maturation that they need in order to fertilize. Because without the luteinizing hormone shot, the eggs actually can't fertilize. Okay, so she gives herself, and it's called a trigger shot. So basically what she's doing is she's triggering the last stage of being able to do retrieval. And then the woman is sedated, And yes, it's a general anesthesia. You have to go under because there's some very important arteries very, very close to one of the ovaries. So in order to make sure that, you know, there aren't any issues with the lady moving or the woman moving, and of course, this is a little tiny target that the doctor's going after. So, you know, they need their patient to be completely still. Because I've had patients ask, "Hey, do I have to be sedated?" And the answer is yes. Plus, you probably want to be sedated, okay? So what the doctor will do is they actually um, uh, infuse air into the abdominal cavity so that there's as much room in there to maneuver as possible. And then using, you know, laparoscopic technology, the reproductive endocrinologist will go in there and actually pluck the eggs out of the follicles, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get as many as they can. Um, Here's the thing about the medications leading up to retrieval. Wow, it's talk about hormonal. Hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, just, just the emotions are all over the place. It's like I've had patients that say that they just go into screaming rages for no apparent reason. I've had other patients say that they weep at the drop of a hat. It's a really intense hormonal ride. And what I tell my patients before they start going through a retrieval is, okay, I want you to go home and I want you to tell your husband that you are not responsible for anything that you say or do for the next 10 days to 15 days, however many days that you're on the stim medications, because it's not you. It's the hormones talking, and you're going to be nuts. You are certifiably insane for the next 2 weeks. So you are not responsible for anything that you say or do. And they all laugh, but I've had patients come back and go, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you told us that because I thought I was going insane. And my husband thought I was going insane." I've got a story. Do I have time for a quick story? This is a
Yeah,
really good
of course,
story.
go for it.
Okay. So I have this one patient who it was her first retrieval cycle with me and her third retrieval cycle because the two other ones had failed. And she went home and I had warned her. I was like, "You're going to be nuts." And she's like, I know, I've been through this before. I'm like, "No, you're really going to be nuts, but it's okay. It's okay." She's like, "Okay, fine." So she goes home and her husband is in the kitchen making dinner. And I'm like, "Oh, how nice." And she stops and looks at him and she says, "What are you doing?" Which is not a "Hi, honey, thank you very much for making dinner" sort of tone of voice. And he stops and he looks at her. He's like, "Making dinner?" And she said, "No, what are you doing right now?" And he said, "Cutting the tomatoes for the salad." And he knows he's in trouble, but he has no idea why he's in trouble. And she said, "You're slicing them." And he says, "Yes." She's like, "Sliced tomatoes don't belong in a salad. Sliced tomatoes ruin a salad. You have just destroyed dinner. I can't believe you're slicing the tomatoes. Oh my God, what are you thinking? We never slice the tomatoes. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing?" And they proceed to have like a 2-minute, really intense screaming match about tomatoes. And then all of a sudden, she takes a deep breath and goes, "Oh my God, this is what Lisa was talking about. That's right. I'm stimming, and this is the stimulation medications." And she looks at her husband, and he looks at her, and he's like, "So I'm not in trouble?" She's like, "Oh no, you're still in trouble because you need to dice those tomatoes, and I need to go into a timeout." And she went
Oh my God.
upstairs, and it was hilarious, and sort of cooled off for 10 minutes and came back down and said, "I'm sorry." And he's like, "I forgot." Even though they had been through this twice before, he was like, "I forget every time how crazy these hormones make you." And she's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Don't worry about it." She refused to eat the salad because she was still pissed off about the tomatoes. But that just illustrates, even if you know that you're going through what's going to happen, sometimes it's really helpful to have that reminder. And I remind them when they come in for treatment, "You're going to be crazy. It's not you. Just, it's okay. Just breathe. You'll be fine." And it's just really easy to forget that hormones control so much, especially in terms of our
Yeah.
emotional state. Ah, yeah. You know, the hot flashes can be awful. The night flashes, the night sweats. It's like headaches, bloating. Bloating's a bad one. Bloating's a big one. And
Mhm.
all of these things, just to put the pitch in here for a minute, all of these symptoms can be managed with acupuncture because you can't take any drugs to deal with this, right?
Right.
I mean, they'll let you take Tylenol or aspirin or something, but there's nothing that can be done about the hot flashes, the night sweats, because it's a reaction to basically the woman is in estrogen dominance. And there's nothing that they can do about that because that's part of what needs to happen during IVF. So we can manage that through the acupuncture. And what the acupuncture does is it actually helps two things when a woman is going through this part of the cycle. It helps her body actually respond to the medications better so that she's actually getting more bang for her buck. But we can also decrease or even like eliminate those kinds of awful side effects from the medications through doing acupuncture. If you haven't done acupuncture leading up to the cycle, while we can decrease them, we can't get rid of them. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. It just really depends on the woman. But what I find is that my patients who are going through that whole 90-day fertility acupuncture program that I have, is they tend not to experience the side effects at all, or minorly. So they might be a little bit more irritable, but they're not going to be full on nutso. Or they
Yeah.
might be, a little weepy, but they won't be finding that it's just debilitating, because we've actually gotten the body to the point where it can actually respond to absorb and not overreact. And the acupuncture, so even though the woman is not having all of those nutso symptoms, she's still responding better to the medications than her friends or other women who are going through IVF that don't have the advantage of going through IVF or acupuncture while they're doing IVF. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what the doctor does during retrieval is he puts air in there. The doctor puts the air in there and then goes in and does the retrieval. Okay. And more is always better. And then most doctors these days are actually doing a 5-day development cycle. So they'll put the egg and the sperm together in the petri dish. Often they
It's
will
in an incubated room. It's
What's
in
that?
the hottest room. It's in like the hottest room ever.
Oh, really? Well, that makes
Yes.
sense.
It's literally an incubator, like
Yeah.
where they do this entire process, and you're behind, like you're all covered up in scrubs, and your face is covered, your head's covered, and you're being incubated with it too.
That makes
So,
sense because we don't want it exposed to cold, because cold will kill the egg and the sperm.
mhm.
So that makes sense that it's really warm in there. And I actually need to talk to my reproductive endocrinologist friend and go see if she'll let me actually see one of these, because that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, you
That
should.
would be a lot of
It's
fun.
incredible.
Right. So what they do is, and most doctors these days are doing ICSI, where they don't just leave it to nature to like have the eggs and the sperm find each other in the dish. They'll actually take the healthiest looking sperm and inject it in there, and that's called ICSI, ICSI, which is intracellular sperm injection.
Hmm.
And what that does is it means that the healthiest looking sperm are the ones that are actually, getting injected, and fertilizing the egg. And then what happens is all of that is basically, they wait to see which ones are actually going to start to grow. Because even though an egg is fertilized, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll like take. And so then what they do is, once they've got eggs that are on the development, they're developing and turning into embryos, okay, then they'll take them and they'll put them in an incubator for 5 days and then let it mature to 5 days. Now, it used to be that they only did that to 3 days, but what they found, and they had more eggs embryos as a result. But what they found is that if they let them mature to 5 days, even though they lose more embryos, they have a higher rate of success, because what they're getting is the embryos that are the hardiest. So even though the numbers go down when the doctors allow it to go to day 5 development, the success rate goes up. So it's worth, it
Yeah.
makes sense to wait to day 5. Now, if a couple decides to do PGS testing, this is where they send the embryos off to do the PGS testing, and the woman is done with the retrieval part of the cycle there. Okay. And with PGS testing, yes, you always have to go to the next month for the transfer. Um, there are some cases, and there are some doctors who who do day, fresh transfer. And so what that means is that they don't do the PGS testing, and they do this more often with younger women. They don't do the PGS testing because younger women have a much higher chance of success without PGS testing. And PGS testing, again, it's another cost. So, and they will then transfer the embryos at the end of day 5 directly into the woman's womb, and it stays with the normal cycle, with that whole, it'll happen all within a month. Okay. um, they don't. So anyway, so let's hold on, let's talk about the actual transfer and implantation process in a little bit. Any thoughts, have you had any patients who have said anything about the symptoms during the retrieval, or any questions that anybody ever has about that whole process?
Um, I haven't actually had any patients that have come to me
For
with
IVF?
IVF.
Okay.
It's only after, because they're feeling like crap during their first 12 or
During the part where they're
12 or
actually
20
pregnant.
weeks.
Got it.
That's when I usually see them. It's like, oh, okay, this is what you're going through. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but
When we get
during this,
there. Okay.
prepping for the IVF, like I have worked with patients who come and they say, oh yeah, I want to, we're prepping for IVF, and then they do the IVF and then they take a break, or
Got
else the embryo has didn't make it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but during this process, like I haven't really seen that yet.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
like maybe you can talk about more of that.
So one of the things, so then let's move on to retrieval. Okay.
Okay.
One of the things that happens, either way, is that the woman is going to be doing progesterone shots. So she's not done with the shots when she's done with the retrieval. All right. She's also going to have to be doing progesterone shots and supplement, or some suppositories. Sometimes they do oral too, but usually it's shots and suppositories. And So whether she's doing a fresh transfer, and that means basically in the same cycle where she did the retrieval, or whether she's doing a frozen transfer, which means that the embryos were frozen and tested or not, but the woman is allowed to have a period, and then she starts prepping for the part where the embryo is actually going to be transferred. Okay. And what happens when she's doing retrieval? Let me talk about retrieval for just one more minute, and then we'll go on to transfer. Retrieval is where most of the emphasis is. Retrieval is the hardest part of this process because it's the most complicated, because the whole point of retrieval is to get as many follicles as possible and get those to be embryos. Retrieval is the hardest part because it's basically about the medications stimulating all those follicles. Retrieval is just, it's hard. Okay, it's the hardest part of this. All right. In comparison, when my patients are getting ready for transfer, they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. And the answer is yes, it is. Because when a woman is getting ready for transfer, all she's doing is basically making sure she's got a nice thick uterine lining so that there's a nice cushy mattress and bed for the embryo to implant in. And we're not trying to develop follicles, which is a really intense hormonal process. All it is some estrogen. And actually, most of the development of the uterine lining happens during the first half of the cycle, okay? Because that's when the uterine lining is building. And then once the woman starts doing the progesterone injections, the uterine lining stops developing thickness, and the structure of it will change, but that's where she's got. So when a woman is getting ready to go through transfer, she'll be doing the ultrasounds, and what the doctors would like to see is a uterine lining thickness that's ideally between 8 and like 14 or 15 millimeters. Anything less than 8, and there are some doctors who will transfer at 7 millimeters, but it's got a decreased chance of success. Anything less than like 6 they'll often cancel the cycle because they know that it's just not going to work. It's almost like when you plant a seed in the ground and half of it's sticking up, it's just not going to develop. So it's the same kind of feeling, is that you want a good thick endometrial lining, which is why they're doing the ultrasounds in the first half of the cycle to see how the woman's uterine lining is actually growing during that time. Okay.
So can you talk a little bit about why the uterine lining is so important?
Because that's where the embryo implants. Okay, the uterine lining, like I said, is basically like, think of a garden and think about when you're planting seeds. You can't really scatter the seeds over the top of the hard packed dirt because there's nowhere for the roots to go, and there's no way for the seed to get the nutrients that it needs. Most directions for seeds come with instructions. It says, plant the seed 1/4 to 1/2 to 1 inch below the surface. It's exactly the same thing.
It's like oil, yeah.
It's basically the same thing with the embryo. What we need is a really good uterine lining, so that when the embryo is outside the uterine lining and sending the signals to the uterine lining, hey, let me in, hey, let me in. What'll happen is that the embryo, when it burrows and when it actually like implants, it's actually burrowing down into the endometrial lining, and it needs to get to a certain depth so that it will actually be able to be nourished the way it needs to be. Thin lining means nourishment isn't going to happen. It's not going to get the depth that it needs. Is it possible that women can get pregnant with a thin lining? Sure, anything's possible. And I've seen women who get pregnant naturally with linings that are just thin. But remember, we're trying to maximize the likelihood that this is going to work. So what we want is to have it between that optimal length or thickness of 8 to like 14, 15, 16 millimeters. Too fat, and what happens is they're afraid the uterine lining is going to start to slough off and break. So they really do have sort of an ideal range within there, okay? And acupuncture, when you're doing acupuncture to prepare for transfer, what you really want to do is come in during the time when the woman is on estrogen, because that's when we're developing the thickness of the uterine lining, and that's when we actually have the most impact. If we wait until after they start doing the progesterone shots, we really actually can't change the thickness of the uterine lining. We might be able to change the receptivity and the structure a little bit to make it more hospitable, but we're not going to be able to do anything with the thickness. So uterine lining thickness needs to be treated by fertility acupuncture during the time that she's on the estrogen and before like day 13, 14, 15 of her cycle. Okay. So that's why the uterine lining needs to be thick, and that's why we need our patients coming in then. So what happens on retrieval day is basically often a woman is given Valium just to kind of get her to relax and calm down, but it's not just her, it's also her uterus. We need the uterus not to spasm, because think about what happens, biologically. It's like when couples are getting pregnant naturally, the sperm is injected into the vaginal vault and it goes up through the cervix. So there's really not supposed to be anything bigger in a uterus other than sperm up until the point where, there's a baby in there. When they do the transfer, they actually have to insert a tube up in past the cervix, in through the cervix and into the uterus. And the uterus doesn't like having things like that stuck up there. And often it will kind of spasm and it's called having an irritable uterus. And what it's doing is it's spasming as a result of having this tube up there that's not supposed to be there. So the Valium is often given to help kind of minimize or even avoid the issue of these small uterine contractions, because the uterus is irritated. And that's really helpful because remember, the uterus is basically a big muscle. And if it's super spasming, then what's going to happen is this embryo, which is trying to implant, may actually be knocked around inside the uterus and not be able to have the chemical signals that it's giving out to the uterine lining, to the endometrium. Hey, let me in. So we really don't want uterine spasms. Okay. So that's what the Valium is for. And when patients text me or ask me, hey, should I take the Valium? The answer is yeah, because we want your uterus to be calm. Okay. Then what they'll do is and often this part I've seen, they'll have a screen up they'll have a screen there, and you can actually see the embryo travel through the screen and actually pop out of the end of the tube and hang out next to the uterine lining. And it's really neat. they don't put the embryo in the uterine lining. And the reason for that is your uterus needs to know it's pregnant. And it won't know that if it doesn't get the chemical signals from the embryo. Hey, I'm coming in. So what happens is the embryo is put next to the uterine lining, and the embryo is sending out these signals, okay? Hey, I'm here. Hey, I'm here. And the uterus will actually send up these what's called spiral arteries, which are these, and they're spiral, and they spiral up out of the uterus, and they actually grab onto the embryo. And then they have this little chemical exchange where the spiral arteries are like, I gotcha. And the embryo is like, okay, let's do this. And the spiral arteries start retracting. And meanwhile, the embryo is actually secreting hormones that dissolve the uterine lining right around the area where it's going to implant, because the uterine lining is like the top layer of dirt. It's a little tough. That's to protect what's underneath. Mm-hmm. So the embryo dissolves the uterine lining, and it goes in and it burrows in, and then the uterine lining closes up behind it. And that's how the body knows, hey, we're pregnant. And then what happens is the endometrium, all right, which is going to turn into the placenta, actually starts secreting the HCG, which is the I'm pregnant hormone. And in about 6 to 8 days afterwards, it starts reaching the concentrations of enough to tell, so that you can do the test, either pee on a stick or get the blood test that says we're pregnant. Okay. Retrieval is a 15-minute process from start to finish once the woman gets up on the table. And my patients come back and go, that was nothing. And I'm like, I know, that's pretty much nothing compared to the incredible ordeal that retrieval is. I'm sorry, transfer is a nothing. Transfer is super easy. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what can we do? Now, a lot of patients who will come will say, hey, can you do that pre-transfer and post-transfer treatment that I've read about on the internet? And it's called the Paulus procedure. And I just like to put my 2 cents in about the Paulus procedure. It's when it was first done back in, I think it was 2011, basically it had incredible results and improved the likelihood of pregnancy by like 30-40%.
Yeah, people love that article.
But the thing is that we've done a lot. It's been done multiple times since then, and those levels have not been borne out. Okay. If we want to truly affect the overall chances of conception and good retrieval, good transfer, and we really need our patients to be coming in for the 3 months prior so that we can improve egg quality and improve hormonal balance so that they get the healthiest eggs they can. So a woman who has been getting regular acupuncture, Paulus makes no difference whatsoever. It doesn't do anything. Okay, so you don't need to go through the stress of pre and post transfer if you've been getting regular acupuncture for fertility. Here's the second thing. The paper that nobody knows about that really should be more widely distributed is if you are doing the post-transfer treatment of acupuncture, that particular procedure must be done within 30 minutes of the transfer. So it really needs to be done on site, because the data that we've seen on research when it's done off site, and that means she gets in her car and she comes to our acupuncture office and she gets this transfer treatment done, we actually increase the likelihood of miscarriage, because there's a very short window during which we want the chi in the blood circulating like crazy. And then after that, we don't want it circulating like crazy. We want everything to settle down, and we want to work on holding things in place. So if you have patients who come in and say, I want Paulus, either you need to go to the clinic, or what you tell them is I do a variation of that. It's not exactly that, but we know that this treatment is actually better for you, because if you do Paulus, and especially if you're doing large intestine 4, that moves things too much in the uterus, and we want to calm things down. So what I tend to do for my patients who are coming in is treatments where I'm working with the spleen meridian, which is about holding things in place, the kidney meridian, which is about helping development. I do a lot of sort of spirit points to help just calm them down and reduce anxiety and just help them feel calm and good. Okay. And the best thing that a woman can do after the transfer, and I tell this to all my patients, is go home and laugh yourself silly, because laughter actually turns off stress hormones, which we don't like. And it also releases something called nitrous oxide, which is a natural sort of relaxant, and it helps the muscles relax. And stress and muscle contractions have a much harder time happening if the woman is feeling easy and relaxed and calm. And I actually usually have my patients come in between 1 and 2 days after the transfer. I just tell them, go home, kick your feet up, spend the next, 6 hours after you do the transfer watching comedies and laughing yourself silly. Have your husband treat you like a queen and wait on you hand and foot, and then come in to see me either the day after or 2 days after, because that's when I can really make the most difference in terms of helping secure things. Okay. So that's the two cents about polis. If you can do it at the clinic, it's a good treatment. If you can't, they're better off going home, and then they come in a day or two later and you help them just keep calm and relaxed and help secure the pregnancy. Okay. So that's how this works. And what we can do as acupuncturists who specialize in fertility, in terms of improving the odds, because there was a research study that came out last year that basically said that doing anywhere from 8 to 12 treatments, and the higher end was better, of acupuncture before a woman goes through the retrieval process in IVF can up to double the likelihood of success. And the reason for that is, unlike the reproductive endocrinologists, who have no way to improve the quality of the eggs and to improve hormonal cycling so that everything is actually in equilibrium and working well together, they can't do that, and we can. All the lifestyle, the nutrition counseling, the supplements counseling, talking to them about what, calming down stress and reducing inflammation, and all of those topics that we talk about. And we'll actually be talking about nutrition and food and reducing hormones reducing toxic exposure to things and things like that in our 5th talk the week after next. All of those things are things that we can counsel on that will help improve the quality of the embryo, or the eggs, that'll help improve the quality of the uterine lining, and that will make it so that when she does go through IVF, she's going to have a much easier time dealing with the side effects and the symptoms, if she has any at all. And we've improved the quality of the eggs, which means that she's going to be at a much higher likelihood that she's actually going to have more healthy fertilized eggs and a higher likelihood of actually going on to pregnancy and delivery, which is really kind of the main goal, is not only getting pregnant but staying pregnant. We also, because we improve the quality of the eggs and because we help balance the hormones, it also means that she's at a lower risk of miscarriage, and the study was really clear on that too. We can up to halve the likelihood of miscarriage at any stage, because what we're doing is we're improving the embryo quality, so it's just more likely to actually implant and sustain and turn into a full-term pregnancy. So that's what we do, why what we do makes such a difference. And that's why we really need to have the 3 months, because we want to improve the quality of the eggs, not just the experience during IVF. And that is not to say there's no reason to go to an acupuncturist for treatment during a cycle, because even if a woman didn't understand what she could do to improve her IVF previous to starting the cycle, by coming to an acupuncturist, we can improve her body's response during the retrieval cycle. We can improve her body's response to the hormones. We can minimize the symptoms, and that is no small thing, because some of these symptoms just are really awful.
Oh yeah, they are really awful.
You know what? It's like suffering. My mission in life is to reduce suffering, and the suffering and unnecessary suffering, and the suffering that women go through to have a kid. Like, anything that I can do to help minimize that so that she's feeling easier and calmer and can function during this is worth it, because it just makes a difficult process just easier to handle. Okay.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about your little project that
I
you're
do.
working
I was just thinking that. Thanks for bringing that up. So I have this project that I've been working on for about a year now, and it's almost ready to launch. I call it the IVF Love Box, and this is the result of a patient coming in to me one day and going, gosh, you know, when the pharmacy sends us this ginormous box of syringes and medications and wipes and all this scary stuff, because, you know, it's like women have to inject themselves when they're going through this. And it's kind of it's pretty nerve-wracking. I wish they would include like a fleece blanket so that at least I could cozy up against something after I'm done giving myself these shots. And I started thinking about that, and I'm like, you know what? Somebody needs to come up with something that women could buy in conjunction with this big box of medications that would help them feel like they were being comforted, and they were being cheered on, and they were being supported through this process. And then I thought, well, I should develop something like that, because, you know, I see my patients go through this all the time, and I have a lot of insight into this, and I'll bet you I could put something together that would be helpful. So that was the brainchild is the IVF Love Box. And what it is 15 days of individual daily love sachets. And in each love sachet, there is a card that has an inspirational picture, and just depending on what the picture is for that day, it's different. An inspirational saying, okay, a positive saying, a cheerful saying, a reminder, you know, to smile in some cases. Actually, my patients who have done this really like the card that I have that says smile every day in the mirror, because it'll make you feel better. And they come back and they're like, darn if it doesn't actually work. You know, my first card basically is just a hey, hello, you're not alone, you're gonna be fine. And then I put a piece of chocolate in there, because honestly, as kids, when we get shots, the doctor gives us candy, and I think that women who are going through this process of IVF should be rewarded for being brave and being courageous enough to deal with these daily shots and get a piece of really yummy chocolate. So, so that's that. They get that every day, and I have a pair of socks in the bag, because in a separate bag that they can, you know, wear during the time they're doing the shots, or take with them when they go to the doctor's appointments. And then there's in their nasty stirrups, because we all hate the stirrups. So they just have nice cozy socks that reminds them, you know, hey, you got this.
I love the socks.
The socks are awesome. I love my socks. I love the socks. It's like all my patients are like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. And I forgot to mention that in each of the sachets, the love sachets, there's a tea bag, and it's an herbal tea that is comforting. And the teas, I've screened the teas, and there's several different flavors, but none of them have anything in them that are going to interfere with the medications. So they're not medicinal teas. These are basically just comforting, loving teas that she can sit down with after she's gone through this whole process and just relax and calm down, because it's really important to be as easy and as stress-free as possible while you're going through this. And then there's a moxa stick. I also include a moxa stick. And moxa is an herb that we use in Chinese medicine to help improve fertility. And it's non-medicinal, but I explain to my patients and the women who buy the Love Box how they can use it to actually help increase the blood flow to their ovaries, which is how they, you know, can making sure their little ovaries and their little follicles are getting as much nutrition as possible. So, and it's all in the box, and it has instructions with it. And my patients, because I'm actually doing test runs with my patients right now, all of my patients who have done it have said that it has made the process so much easier. They didn't feel as alone. They really felt supported and loved and encouraged through the process with the Love Box. And that's really what it's all about, because this is such a tough procedure, and you're not doing this out of fun. So anything that I can do to help a woman realize that, you know what, it's like you're not alone, you're supported, is important to me. And so yeah, so there's my Love Box. And then my other project, and I'm hoping to go have the first run of it in mid-October. And that is my online 90-day fertility reset seminar, where I will teach women who don't have access to an acupuncturist who specializes in fertility, or are going to an acupuncturist but want more information in terms of all of the things that they can do in terms of lifestyle changes to help support their fertility, it'll be a course where, you know, I'll teach them what that they can do to help and make lifestyle changes to help improve the chances that they're going to have healthy follicles and healthy eggs. So those are my two projects. And when I've got the Love Box up and running, and I think I'll probably be able to start shipping that early next year, you know, I'll make an announcement and I'll tell you, and I'll put it on my Facebook page, and I'll also have it on my website. And then my 90-day fertility reset, which is going to happen, I hope, in mid-October. But if you're interested in either one of these, just shoot me a PM, or you can go to my website and send me a message from my website, or call me. But any information, you know, I'm happy to do a free phone consult, anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes. It just depends on, you know, what's going on and what you're interested in doing. If you're interested in the reset project, the phone consultation only needs to be about 15 minutes, because I just need to make sure that you're, you know, this is something that you can benefit from, because I want women who are joining this to benefit from it. Yeah, so that's what I want to do to help serve women who are going through this very, you know, rigorous process, and do everything we can to make sure that they only have to do this once. Because what I tell my patients is, this next IVF cycle, I want it to be your last best cycle. I want you to get as many embryos as you want, and I want you to never have to go through this again. So that's my goal, is to help women do this once, so we can move on to the next stage, which is helping them to get pregnant and have,
Yes.
and be in pregnancy, you know, be pregnant.
Yes.
So
Yes, there's so much that goes along with this. And like, I love that we have this baby making series,
me
because
too.
we're just like really breaking it down for everybody. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what's the regular period look like? Um, and, you know, that's the beauty of women. Like, we're able to have children and
Mm-hmm.
carry a baby. And it's because we have this period, you know, like we're building something inside to hold a baby inside of us. And
Mm-hmm.
then if we don't have a baby, then that gets shed as our period. And, you know, how do we regulate it? And, you know, if we decide later, I mean, these are all options that,
Right.
you know, you can either do it naturally, um, which actually next week we're going to be
Yep.
talking about, okay, what if you do want to approach this naturally instead of going the IVF ART route?
Right.
And then, you know, so there are definitely a whole bunch of options, and I
Mm-hmm.
love that you have this program to guide women through it, through the entire process, from like learning how to read the BBC charting and how that affects their hormones,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, like all of it's, you know, preparing the body for its most optimal
Right.
being, and that's, you know, when your body's in its most healthy state, that's
Mm-hmm.
the state of fertility.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, yeah, this has been great, because, you know, I love this topic because there's so many women out there, and they're they want to know, but
Uh-huh.
there's also so much information where it's not quite accurate. And when it comes down to trying to do things on your own, like sometimes it can be really lonely,
Mm-hmm.
um, until you like find somebody that you can work with. And I know that between you and me, we've had a bunch of conversations
Mm-hmm.
surrounding fertility, and like, you know, different things that, you know, affect our lifestyle. And um, sometimes it's just really worth, you know, finding out like through conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, reaching out to see, hey, how can you help me? And this is what I do with my patients too. Like, hey, you know, like, what are you thinking about down the line?
Mm-hmm.
You're on prenatal, so what's that all about? Like, are you trying? Or are you, you know, like, what's your story behind that?
Right.
And, you
Right.
know, like a lot of people have this in the back of their minds. So thank you for doing this with
Oh,
me.
I'm so glad that you wanted to do this. It's like it's really, you know, I think there's so much that women don't know that they have control over and that they can change. It's like, you know, it's never hopeless. In terms of if you have a woman who's relatively healthy and still has a relatively regular cycle, there's a lot of things that they can do to improve their chances of getting pregnant. Nothing can guarantee it, right? Not even IVF is a guarantee. But there
Yeah,
are so many things that we can do to help improve the odds of helping a couple actually have a child and create the family of their dreams, that it's I mean, I'm just really happy we're doing this series too, because what it means is that we can help couples, we can help women, you know, get to their optimal health and their optimal fertility and improve the likelihood that they're actually going to be able to get pregnant. So, thanks
exactly.
so much. This was a fun
Yeah,
one.
you're welcome.
My
This
pleasure.
was very fun.
Yeah.
So, we're gonna wrap it up today. Unless Lisa, you have something else that you want to
Nope.
talk about?
Just next week
No.
we're doing natural conception. So if anybody wants to join us for that, please feel free. And you
Yeah,
know,
and if you have questions,
yep.
and if you have questions, just let us know.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, want to try naturally first and,
Yep.
go through. There's so many stories like, hey, this is a tip for you,
Right.
in how to get pregnant naturally. And, like after a while, you hear so many different things and it can be frustrating.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. So
it can
we'll,
also be fun too. So,
yes, let's not forget that part.
yeah, fun, keeping that in mind. All right. Well, we'll see you next week
Sounds
at
good.
11 a.m. again. And this is uh, myself. I'm Eva Liu, and this is Lisa Grant, who is in Las Vegas. And both of us are, if you love this stuff, please share it with somebody that you
Please.
know
Yep.
who's
Yep. Yep.
interested, and spread the word, because this is a conversation that's definitely worth having. So we'll check you out next time.
Sounds good. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Lisa.